Because of COVID-19, we switched to a different format with our public programs this fall, as everyone else did. And we have two series, conversation series, that are ongoing in the fall. One on race, rights, and resilience with 4 speakers, 2 African-American women scholars and 2 Jewish women scholars. That series started. The third one is actually tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. Arizona time. Please feel free to join us. If you don't know how, send an email to Melissa or to myself, or send an emergency email on chat and we will contact you. But today is the different series, our second series, on representing past evils and trauma, 4 perspectives on Holocaust museums. We have 4 either curators or directors, or sometimes founders and directors, or directors and curators, a mix of 4 different people from 4 different national contexts, who will speak about how the Holocaust is represented in their national context, the issues they are facing, the challenges they are facing, the way they decided to represent the Holocaust within their geography, within their history. We started with Stephen Luckert from the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. the first time. Today we have Tali Nates, I will introduce her in a moment more formally, from South Africa, from the Holocaust and Genocide Museum in South Africa in Johannesburg. Our third speaker will speak from Poland, the former director of Poland, that is the official name of the one of the newest and really large Holocaust museums in Warsaw. He will be an interesting person because he was actually more or less let go, fired, chased out, whatever word you want to use, by the current Polish government from his position. But he will speak about this museum when he was the director, and what is at stake today about the museum in Warsaw. And the last one will take us to Berlin, Germany, with Thomas Lutz. He is the director of the museum called Topography of Terror, that really focuses on the perpetrators in the Nazi regime and then the Holocaust. And he will walk us through the challenges and the ideas they had to put up this specific exhibit. So please join us for all of these talks if you can. But today, let's pay our attention to our wonderful speaker, Tali Nates from Johannesburg. Tali Nates is the founder and director of the Holocaust and Genocide Centre in Johannesburg. It is one of 3 such centers in South Africa. I think I'm not mistaken about this. I think it's 3 centers, 1 in Durban, 1 in Cape Town, and 1 in Johannesburg. Since she was the founder of that center, we can also ask her later, like, what did it take to actually create such a museum out of nothing, so to speak? And then direct it as she's doing today. And she's involved hands-on with everything from curating to education to exhibit design to inviting speakers, a multi-talented woman, I would say, and a wonderful host. When I was visiting you, Tali Nates, in March for the opening of an exhibit, and then had an emergency flight back because of COVID-19. Tali Nates also has published widely in the field, has spoken on the Holocaust and the legacy of the Holocaust in many different countries. One of her writings, if you want to learn more about her personal life, is a chapter in a book called God, Faith and Identity from the Ashes, Reflections of Children and Grandchildren of Holocaust Survivors. She also serves on the academic advisory group of the School of Social and Health Sciences at Monash University in South Africa. And actually, I won't say anything about your father yet, and uncle. I think we leave this up for when we have a time to speak about your personal motivation and history. So welcome, Tali. I will say for everyone who's listening, how we will proceed. We have about 40 minutes or so where Tali will present and engage with me in this conversation about how we can think about a museum in the South African context. And the last half hour of our 75 minutes today will be for you to engage with Tali with your questions short comments or remarks and questions. I always say at the beginning of this, please feel free to ask whatever you want, but don't remind yourself that you are not giving a co-presentation today. So keep it within a reasonable time that other people have a chance to ask their questions as well. Tali, it is your turn. And again, welcome. And I'm very happy that this is working out.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. It's wonderful to join you all in Arizona. As I said to Bjorn, I've never been. I've been in neighboring states, but never in Arizona. So it's wonderful to come all the way from Johannesburg to Arizona tonight or this morning for you. And just to mention that with us, joining us, and I saw amongst the participants, the founder and first director of the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Centre, Myra Osran. So it's wonderful. And maybe when we have a conversation and you want to know something about Cape Town, maybe she'll be able to offer an insight or two. So Bjorn, thank you so much for inviting me. And I thought that maybe what I'll start to do, because I wonder if any of you visited South Africa before or Johannesburg, but if you didn't, I thought that just for a few minutes, I will share with you some pictures and some sort of journey through this new Holocaust and Genocide Centre. We only officially opened in March of 2019, even though it was about 11 or 12 years in the making. We actually started with the idea, with the dream, with the vision in 2008, and that will be part of our conversation later between me and Bjorn. So perhaps let's go and visit the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and we will then start the conversation. So, welcome to our building, our institution in the heart of the city. This is an institute in partnership with the city of Johannesburg. It is in a very, very central area of Johannesburg, next to many other museums and galleries. Opposite us is the Four Seasons Hotel, not Four Seasons Garden Landscaping parking lot, the Four Seasons Hotel of Johannesburg. Remember this, this image, because as you can see, this is a somewhat industrial looking building that is engulfed from all sides with railway tracks. And those railway tracks are embedded into concrete and stone. And there are trees surrounding the building. The building is L-shaped in size, and it's built of brick, concrete, glass, steel, granite, a very industrial, sort of harsh, almost masculine architecture that I can speak a little bit about more later, and maybe we can discuss it in question time as well. And one more thing that I can speak about is that the whole building architecture is really full of symbolism, from the trees that are sort of symbolizing the landscape of genocide in Europe, in Rwanda, and so on, to the railway lines that symbolize modernity of genocide, but also, of course, oppression and suffering. So we'll speak a little bit more about that, but this is our building. The brick is laid in English bond, just to say. That is also an interesting little point that maybe we can discuss later. In English bond is long, short brick. This is the same way the British Empire designed its building of beauty and power for generations and for centuries. But just to make you aware that the prison just down the road that had Gandhi and Mandela in it, that is called Number 4 or the Fort of Constitution Hill, is built in English bond brick. And also Auschwitz the buildings are built in English bond brick. So just to plant some of the symbolism the architect took. And you see this English bond here as we go into the plaza, into the Children Memorial. And I want to speak a little bit about the building is sort of telling the story through the architecture and through the symbolism of the architecture, the cobblestones of the plaza, for example, but also through transparent glass that tells the story of individuals rather than statistics. This is the Children Memorial with children drawings, with names, and not the place of death, but the place of birth of the 250 people, mainly children, that we chose to display their name in. One more thing that I want to speak about, and maybe we can raise it also in the discussion, is that in many of the areas, we decided to use 3 languages, and that is English, that is one of the 11 official languages of South Africa, but in memorial spaces also Hebrew and Kenya Rwanda. So we can talk about that a little bit later. And then, of course, the permanent exhibition that we opened in March last year is non-linear exhibition. It's thematic exhibition, and it tells the story of genocide in the 20th century. And it looks at really 3 or 4 themes. It starts with the theme of understanding genocide. What is genocide? And giving examples from Namibia, next door to us, the Herero and Nama genocide, from Armenia, from the Holocaust, of course, in Europe, from Rwanda, and then speaking about Raphael Lemkin, speaking about crimes against humanity and genocide. And as crimes against humanity, of course, we look at South Africa and our period of apartheid. So this is the one theme that we look at. The other theme that we look at is the Holocaust. And that theme is displayed again non-linearly. So for example, this space is talking about the world that was, using stories from survivors or refugees that settled in Johannesburg and South Africa. So we use artifacts, we use photographs, we use lots of testimonies, we use films and many other elements, including maps and more. And it's a very interactive, but because we had little money, and we will speak about it later, how do you create a museum when you don't have a fortune, but you really want to tell the story in an interactive way, and how you can do it also in a low-tech way, not only in a high-tech way. So we will speak a little bit about that later. The Holocaust themes are going through 6 thematic spaces. So for example, this space that I want to speak about for 1 minute is life and death in the shadow of occupation. Now, where we really wanted to tell the story in a bit of a different way is we didn't want this chronology, this linear story where Hitler came to power, the war started, ghettos, camps, final solution, deportation, death, liberation. Genocide is much more complicated. Things happen many times in the same time. You have concentration camps already in 1933. You have dislocation and deportations throughout the period. You have ghettos early, ghettos late. You have hiding, you have resistance. It's a multi-layered story. And that's how we tell the story. With lots of choices, you can go to all directions, you can learn the story in many, many ways, high-tech, low-tech, artifacts, stories, and lots of poetry, art, and music. We use survivors that settled in South Africa. So just 2 examples. Veronica Phillips on top, a Hungarian survivor from Budapest that was deported to 3 different concentration camps, including Ravensbrück. She just celebrated on Monday her 94th birthday, and this is her childhood doll that survived the ghetto period in Budapest, stayed with her mother. Veronica was deported, as I said, to 3 camps. When she came back, her mother gave her back the doll. She kept the doll until we opened, dedicated it to the museum, and here it is. On the bottom, Sylvester Sendakieye, Tutsi survivor from Rwanda, telling his testimony to schools, to learners. He did not have artifacts to give, but we received a great collection of artifacts from 2 churches, Nyamata and Arama in Rwanda, and he recognized clothes that were very similar to what he was wearing, shoes that he was wearing, and was showing and telling and sharing his stories. The exhibition is full with survivor stories, and including 24 films of survivor stories in the exhibition. I spoke about maps, many, many maps of Africa, of Europe, of course, amongst the many other displays that I showed you. To create a point of a movement from the Holocaust story to the Rwandan story, we created a transition space, and this transition space goes from the theme of choices and dilemmas to the theme of choices and dilemmas on a governmental level, not on an individual level. Rwanda and South Africa in April 1994 chose very different paths. South Africa, of course, voted Nelson Mandela in our first democratic election. The same month, the same year, 3.5 hours away from us, flights every day from here to Rwanda. In Rwanda, genocide already was happening for 3 weeks. Started, of course, on the 7th of April, 1994. So we do this transition to Rwanda, and we do the transition also to the stories in color. Holocaust was black and white, and of course, Rwanda is in full color. It's only 26 years ago. It's almost with full senses. You are surrounded by the stories, by the music, by the testimonies, many artifacts again, projections, films, and so on. The reflection garden, again, these 3 languages that I spoke about, music of survivors from the Holocaust, survivors from Rwanda, teaching each other childhood songs. And we had a composer, wonderful composer in South Africa, living in Cape Town, Philip Miller, that created this amazing composition from their songs and from their sounds. It is available on our website, and you're very welcome to listen to it. This is our garden of reflection that is full of greenery, full of sound, and really invites you to reflect on what you learned. The last space is the space of bringing it all to today's South Africa. Not apartheid South Africa, not colonial time South Africa, but today's South Africa that is still facing the past, the difficult past of racism, but also facing a very difficult present of gender-based violence, of xenophobia, of Afrophobia, and making connections of refugees issues, for example, between these histories. And just to maybe end very quickly, you know, the connections for us are very important. So our exhibition brings different histories. And I'll explain later through our conversation with Bjorn why we chose to do it in that way. But the link is always to Johannesburg or South African survivors that settled here, to their stories, to their lessons, to their messages to us. And always the connections is to us today. What can we do? perhaps we can speak later today about memory activism, something that we do through our connections to today's world. And we do it through education. We have thousands, before COVID, thousands of learners coming, students coming to the center, hundreds of teachers, of course, university students and the public. We moved since March to online format, but we reopened on the 1st of September, and we do have many groups still coming and engaging with the history. And just finally, we also created programs using the history of apartheid, the history of Rwanda, the history of the Holocaust, and brought that through a temporary exhibits to Africa. And we launched it in 12 African countries, including Nigeria, the Gambia, Mozambique, Rwanda, and more, and training teachers to use the history of extremism to fight extremism in Africa today. We also have a temporary exhibition space. It's a beautiful space. And here, Bjorn, is our wonderful partnership that was launched this year in March with the Martin Springer Institute's fantastic exhibition about Belgium. And it is now at our center and will be there until next year. Hopefully can travel to the other centers in South Africa, in Cape Town and Durban. And we're very, very grateful for that partnership. So just, sorry, it took a bit of time, but I think it's important that people will see what we do.
No, this was absolutely excellent, because if someone wasn't there, we don't know, like, is it a one-room space? Is it a two offices tucked away somewhere, or is it actually a museum, and what type of museum? I can say for sure, when I walked to your exhibit space in March, how gripping it is to walk through it in a non-linear way, and avoiding all the pitfalls when you do comparisons, because it's not easy to compare and contrast, and to not even go to a point where you evaluate which suffering is worse, or what someone else earlier talked about, the Olympics of suffering, that you don't fall into this pitfall and do something else. So anyway, it's an amazing exhibit. But before we go back to the exhibit space in the museum, I think it might be helpful for our audience to understand why there's a Jewish community in South Africa. Not too long, I'm sure that could be 2 hours in itself, but how long have they been there? And also about the survivor community, Jewish survivor community in South Africa. Just a few things to give us some context.
Thank you, and really very briefly, the South African Jewish community is not very large. At its peak, probably in the 1970s, it was about 120,000 people. Today, it's shrank quite considerably to probably about 55,000 or so. Many left during apartheid, and then many left after apartheid ended. The community arrived around the 1880s. And even though in the beginning they arrived mainly from England, in the beginning of the 20th century, the large immigration was actually from the Baltic states, from Lithuania and from Latvia. This immigration was halted, was stopped by the government of the time. In 1930, a Quota Act, immediately after the Great Depression, was implemented that really forbade immigration from Latvia and Lithuania directly from Eastern Europe, where people came because of anti-Semitism, but also because of poverty and because of economic reasons and discrimination and so on. There was a loophole. And when Hitler came to power in 1933, there was a loophole because Germany was not mentioned in the Quota Act. And German Jews used that loophole, and from 1933 to 1936, about 3,600 German Jews arrived in South Africa, but then the government recognized that loophole and closed it hermetically, I would say, in January of 1937 with the Aliens Act that forbade, without saying the word Jew, but forbade German immigration to South Africa. So between 1939 and 1945, only about 400 Jews managed to come into the country. And after the war, probably about, I don't know, some hundreds, 400 or so survivors from all around Europe. France, the Netherlands, Holland, Belgium, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and so on, Germany, Austria, came to South Africa. And we are using those stories in all 3 centers in the country. So as Bjorn introduced to you, there are 3 Holocaust and Genocide centers in the country. In Cape Town, that was the first one. And we have with us the founder of that center. It was founded in 1999, also using many stories of survivors that settled in Cape Town. And then another smaller center was opened in Durban, and we are the baby. We, as I said, just opened last year.
Thank you. So now that the museum is there, perhaps it's more evident why it should be there, but when it's not there, how do you get people motivated? What was the driving force and the driving motivation to put into conversation the Holocaust, Apartheid, and Rwanda, both for you personally, but also how did you get other people to sign on to this project?
It's a good question, because I know, look, in your series of 4 lectures, I'm very glad that I'm representing the South. You know, you have 3 from the global North, and I'm representing the South. And there are, of course, museums in Australia, there are museums in Mexico, in Argentina, Brazil, and so on. So what is the story that we need to tell in South Africa? Let's start with the acknowledgement that this is a country that suffered hundreds of years of colonialism from the 17th century, the Dutch and then the British, and lots of suffering and racism, of course. And then, of course, apartheid from 1948 to 1994. So how do you tell a story of Rwanda or the Holocaust or Namibia to a country that is still facing its own very difficult past, and as I said, still struggling with that past in the present? So in a way, and maybe the easiest will be to, first of all, to acknowledge the Department of Education, the Ministry of Education in South Africa, recognize that the teaching of the Holocaust is incredibly important, and in 2007 made it compulsory for all 15 years old, 14, 15 years old, our grade 9 and 9th grade, to study about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust for 15 hours. It is compulsory in all the schools of the country. And you can ask yourself, why would they do that? And by the way, you start learning about that before you go and learn about apartheid in the same year. In the same year, you go and learn about the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights, of course, the Convention Against Genocide, and then apartheid. And the logic of this Department of Education curriculum was, during the Second World War and the Holocaust, no one spoke about human rights. It was not something that was, spoken about or was important. So after the Second World War, when the UN was established, and in December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention Against Genocide, passed, was adopted in the UN. Still, in the same year, 1948, apartheid started in South Africa. So what a country learns from the past. And the Department of Education really wanted that connection. They wanted the students to learn first about what happened, then about apartheid, and then make the connection and look at other atrocities after that. So going back to us when we were motivated and thinking about how to do it, the curriculum was already there. Cape Town Centre, Durban Centre were already supporting teachers around the country to teach the curriculum. We joined in to support the teaching of that curriculum. We knew that we have to acknowledge that. And we knew also that you cannot just do the Holocaust. We are not stopping in 1945, saying never again, and then saying, and you know, wonderful, never happened again, never happened in Africa again. Because in 1994, as I said before, 2 countries faced choices, and Rwanda went into 3 months of genocide, 100 days where probably 1 million or more than 1 million were murdered. So just finally, and maybe we can speak about it a little bit more, maybe an image, very simple image that we many times use is the following. Because of our colonial history, because of our apartheid history, when you speak about racism here, it's always white and black. That is the imagery. That is what racism is for South Africans. Very, very strongly so. When you look at the Holocaust, you look at white people that killed white people, that many times looked exactly the same. And I'll share my family story, but you know, the blue eyes, the blonde hair, I mean, what's the difference? A South African will ask. When you look at Rwanda and you talk about Hutu, Tutsi, Twa, when you look at militias killing, you know, and so on, you look at black killing black. And again, the South African child, and I'm talking about a 14, 15 years old child, that for that child or that youth, the prism is black, white, that discussion opens a wider discussion about race, a wider discussion about othering. And that leads us to the issue of Afrophobia, Xenophobia, gender-based violence, disabilities, and so on, all subjects that we are dealing with in our exhibition.
So Tali, you alluded already to, like, if I look at my own history, meaning your history, we don't know your history. So say a little bit about your family history, that we understand your own motivation that drives you to being the founder and now the director of the museum.
So thank you for that. I come from a family of survivors, of Holocaust survivors. My mother and her immediate family managed to get out just before the war. They were from Warsaw, Poland, but they managed to get out just before the war to then British mandated Palestine. Her sister actually got out just about 3 months before the war started through a fictitious marriage with a friend of her brother. So quite a fantastic story. The rest of the family, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins in Warsaw and in other towns were all murdered. No one survived. My father's family came also from Poland, but from the southwest of the country, the Tatra Mountains area, very beautiful, the Zakopane ski resort sort of area. And my father came from a little town called Novi Targ. The story, of course, is complicated, but in 2 minutes, he had 2 sisters, a brother, only a mother. His father died when he was a baby, and he survived 4 concentration camps, and he lost his mother, my grandmother, and two sisters. They were 12 and 16 years old. Their name were Helen or Hela and Sila, and they were murdered in Belzec in eastern Poland in August of 1942. My uncle also survived many concentration camps and forced labor camps. They reunited in Plaszów camp, concentration camp in Krakow. They found their way to Oskar Schindler's famous list. Both of them were on Schindler's list. On page 10 of the list, you'll find their names, Turner, Moses, and Henrik. And were taken with the Schindler Jews to Brunlitz and were liberated by the Russians in May of 1945. Now, both of them found their way later on to Israel already. My father got there in the 1950s, married my mom. I have one brother. And Schindler used to come to Israel. He used to see him when he visited. He died in 1974, but until then, he used to see Schindler in Israel. And I grew up on those messages from my father. That was very traumatized man. He was a teenager. He was 14 years old when the war started. So very, very traumatized man, but very tolerant, very open-leaning sort of thinking around choices. People have choices. He used to talk about Schindler. I'm alive because of Schindler. You're alive because of Schindler. And about the fact that people can make choices and you cannot put everyone in a box. So, for example, he worked in a Volkswagen garage. He learned to become a motor mechanic because he had no education, and that's what he learned to do. And in Israel, he worked in Volkswagen, and he used to say, look, it's a new generation. You have to look at the new generation and say, it was your parents' generation. It's not your generation in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. So this is my sort of background. And I think it's important because in 1994, I voted in line. I voted at 9:30 at night in our first democratic elections in 1994, 27th of April. There was already genocide in Rwanda for 3 weeks. And the coin never dropped. I did not stand there in the queue so happy that we are safe and there is democracy and everything. I did not make the connection to Rwanda. I did not make the never again at that point to myself. And only later, quite soon after, when genocide survivors started to come for medical treatment in South Africa in 95, in 96, I started to work with them very closely in NGOs that I worked with, and started to visit Rwanda and work in Rwanda and make the connections and realize, to go back, that my story and my history, but also the history of the never again with question mark, has to be connected, has to be put side by side, and has to be connected to today's world, because even I did not make the connection when I heard all those stories from my father. And we have to educate about making connections quicker. And that's part of what we do at the centers in Johannesburg, but also in Cape Town and in Durban.
Thank you, Tali, for actually managing to put a rather painful legacy into a short and condensed form for us to see the connections for yourself, and then the connections that you made for yourself that really have larger implications from Europe to Africa, from you standing in line to vote to what was happening in Rwanda at the same time, and then somehow finding the resources and the support to create this museum. There's so much to talk about in the museum, but obviously we can't do in the allotted time. But I do want to perhaps focus on two things, just as an example, like one particular item or story in the exhibit that you're particularly proud of, that you think is really important, and one that was contentious, and why it was contentious and how you solved it.
That is such a great question, Bjorn. So there are so many things in the exhibition, artifacts and art and testimonies and movies that I'm so attached to, because of course I was part of a wonderful curatorial team with professor of education, with artists, with experts on the Holocaust, on Rwanda, on genocide. So it's so hard to choose one display. So maybe I will speak about the fact that we use the arts, because I think that that does not happen in most museums. And from the start, we interviewed, we had processes of talking to survivors and asking them how the building should look like. And they were the ones that spoke about the railway lines and the cattle trucks, or the Rwandan survivors that spoke about the trees as witnesses. We spoke to students and we spoke to teachers about the content of the exhibition. And they said, you know, students learn in different ways. Some students learn, people don't read books on the wall. So Stephen Lockhart actually spoke about it, that when they did the USHMM, they put a panel of 400 words, and then they realized that they need to go down to 180 words, and now they realize that it should be between 80 and 100 words. And that's what we did. Our panels are 80 to 100 to 150 words. And how do you do that? But the teachers also say to us, you know, some students react to poetry, some to music, some to films, some to multimedia, right? And so on. And what we did was to really include in every space a poem, music. We have Yiddish music, we have Kenya-Rwandan music, we have Hebrew music, we have Polish music, we have all sorts of musical additions, we have testimonies. We have a lot of art, we have a lot of artifacts, and that is really, really special. And I'm very proud of that. It was something that I did not see in any other museum, but it works. And people react to it really, really well. And then what was contentious? You know, it took us about 8 years to write the exhibition. It's actually quite unbelievable to think, but it's much easier to write a lot than to write a little. So, you know, the process of cutting and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and every word is sort of, you know, a discussion. That was really hard. And then we went to the experts. We wanted to know about disabilities, for example. Went to experts, asked them, what language should we use? What is the right context? What is the right content? We went to other experts on other things, Michael Berenbaum, for example, just to check about numbers and the terminology and so on, and many, many other things. And I think the hardest then, just finally, the hardest thing was what to include and what not to include, because in the end, you have only 420 square meters. You want to include more genocides, but you can't. It becomes a fruit salad. You know, it becomes like a cacophony of too many genocides. So we had to make very, very hard choices of only concentrating on 4 in the 20th century and concentrating in focus on 2, that is the Holocaust in Europe and Rwanda in Africa. And that was really, really hard. Luckily, we have the temporary exhibit space, and we already had exhibitions about Cambodia. We had events about the Rohingya, about the Yazidi, and about many, many more, Darfur and so on. So we do have the space to do more, but not in the permanent exhibition.
Just a quick follow-up, and if there's no example you can think of, that's fine too. But was there like an art object, an artifact that was contentious to some and not to others, and that you decided not to display or to display despite some objections?
That is also a great question, because I didn't have time to speak about the principles, the design principles and the writing principles, but that leads me to exactly that. From the beginning, we decided that this is not going to be a perpetrators-driven exhibition. The exhibition is very much full of life and not only about the moment of death. So we really looked at every artifact. Artifacts of perpetrators, we looked at them. Do we really need them? And if we need them, how should we display them? I'll tell you a little story. There was a doctor, he's not alive anymore, a South African doctor that was part of the team that did the autopsy of the British team of soldiers, doctors and soldiers from the British Army that did the autopsy on Heinrich Himmler after his suicide. Now this doctor removed the glasses of Heinrich Himmler and brought them home to South Africa. And his daughter asked if we want to display the glasses in our exhibition. And we asked ourselves, what for? What story will it tell? Will it add to the narrative? Will it add to the understanding of the story we are telling? And we decided not to actually display Himmler's glasses. So this is just one story, but there are many, many, many more.
I do have one important more question, but I think I'm holding back on this one right now, and first see whether people want to jump in at this point and ask their questions, clarifications, or questions something that we didn't touch upon at all that really interests you. So I'm opening up to anyone. Please, if you want to speak, unmute yourself and just speak. I will moderate only if 3 people are trying to speak at the same time.
I do have a somewhat pedestrian question. The museum you showed us at the start of your remarks looks marvelous. How did you raise the funds, and to what extent are there government monies involved?
It's such a key question, actually, such a key question, because to the last part of your question, is the government money involved? No, and it's a good question, because if it's a governmental museum, possibly the government can also tell you what to put and what not to put. And there are good examples in Poland, actually, the Second World War Museum in Gdansk that was put and is now changing with this new government. The displays are changing, the films are changing, the director is probably going to change. So government is maybe the easier route, because then you get money and it's very nice. You don't have to work too much, but it's coming with strings attached. So we went the other way. We are a City of Johannesburg partnership. They gave us the land and they helped us with the approving of the plan, the rezoning, the electricity supply, you know, all those things that are very important that you need. But they said to us, you have to raise all the rest of the money. And we are a non-governmental organization, started in 2008 to fundraise. I was so lucky to have and still have a wonderful board of trustees and advisory board in the beginning. And specifically one amazing driving force, the late Gerald Leisner. He was a philanthropist, he was a community leader. He was really a wonderful person that had a personal connection to the Holocaust. His grandparents were murdered in Auschwitz, and he knew how to open the doors. He was the one that, when I'm a historian, I did not know how to ask for money. And in the beginning, I would say to Gerald, I don't know how to ask for money. And he would teach me how to ask for money. He would go with me and he will ask, and then he will come out and he will say, you know what? No is also an answer. It's all right. You're not asking for yourself. And he would teach me how to do it. And he passed away in 2016. We dedicated our permanent exhibition in his memory. And And actually, the majority of the money was in by 2016. And since then, myself and wonderful people at the Board of Trustees are doing the rest. COVID-19 makes us rethink the way we are raising funds, the way we are looking at things. But luckily for us, we are a free-for-all education institution. We do not charge at the door. So we did not lose anything. We did not lose the sale of tickets or anything like that. So that was very, very lucky. We believe in free education for all. We want everyone to come, and that helps very much in the way we manage the center and raise the funds.
Thank you.
Your opportunity to ask or make a comment. Elliot.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. It's been wonderful to learn about what you're doing, and accolades to you. I'm curious, you know, in America, most of the Jewish community, the survivors, and especially their children have a very close connection to never again. And I'm wondering how the feeling is with the Black population to Rwanda in South Africa.
Elliot, it's a great question. And the one thing that I want to share with you, and it's actually quite sad, is that most South Africans do not know about Rwanda. They actually do not know about the genocide. And many of them do not know where Rwanda is even. We concentrate many times about our history, about our past, but also our present and our challenges. And we do not know, not even about Namibia. And Namibia is our neighboring country. Actually, South Africa controlled Namibia during apartheid for many years. And many do not know about the Herero and Nama genocide that started in 1904 and just do not know. When they come to the center and they learn, the students, generally, the students that are coming to the center, and of course our country is majority Black, the whites are a minority, of course, in South Africa. So when they come to the center, there is really a great sorrow. I want to use a strong word, but a great sorrow when we learn together about Rwanda, because it's very close to home. It is fresh. It's only 26 years ago. And the connection to the April 1994 and to our story makes a huge impact. And people come again and again just to actually spend more time about the Rwandan story and learning more about Rwanda. The Holocaust is more known, specifically because it is in the curriculum. So more students know about it, more teachers, of course, know about it because they have to learn about it. The Jewish community in South Africa also come to the center, and they are attached also very much to the Never Again. We had, by the way, you're not asking about it, but maybe I can say, because it's quite interesting, that in the beginning there were some that said, wait a minute, why is there also another genocide? Why is there also Rwanda in the exhibition? But that was really just in the beginning, and it was actually the Holocaust survivors that came very strongly and said, it has to be here, because the world did not learn. The never again is really never again until the next time. And we have to show that it happened again and again, and it happened next door to us. So that happened quite early on and really helped the conversation around our center.
Thank you, Tali. I know there are a couple of students listening in and attending. And for many of you or some of you, this may be all new territory. But I do encourage you to ask the question, even if you feel like, I don't even know where to start asking a question. Don't be afraid. Ask the question, make a comment if you're a student at NAU from different classes. This is my invitation to you to ask. And if you're a lifelong learner and you're a student, you're welcome to ask also. So I will give you a moment. I will get in my question that I thought is important. I'm sure there is a South African we. At some point, Tali, you talked about our and we. And we know the our and we could be a national we, a South African we. But we also certainly know from South Africa there are different identities, different identifications. You know, the Black South Africans, people who are neither Black nor white South Africans because they came from India and settled there, the Jewish South African community, and so on and so forth, all the different communities. Do you have a sense they respond to the exhibit in distinct ways?
It's an important question because South Africa is a very diverse country. It's a country of 60 million people. We have, of course, different backgrounds within the country, even in each community, it's not monolithic. So what is the white community? You have people of Dutch descent, you have people of English descent, you have Jews, you have Italians, you have Greeks, you have Portuguese community, a big Portuguese community, for example, that immigrated to South Africa. And in that way, many of the communities are very diverse. Also, there are millions of people that immigrated in the last 20 or 30 years from many other African countries. South Africa, in a way, is the United States of Africa. It is an economic hub, specifically Johannesburg, that is the economic center of South Africa with our stock exchange and many industries and mining around us and so on. So many people from other African countries. Now, I spoke before about Afrophobia and Xenophobia, and that exists. And in 2008, we had horrific xenophobic attacks where more than 60 people were killed in the streets of South Africa because they were perceived as foreigners and they were perceived as people that are coming to take our jobs, in inverted commas, and a lot of stereotypes around foreigners exist in the country. Other attacks happened until...
Who killed them, for those of us who don't know?
So it is black on black violence, if you wish. It is South African specifically. It is based on economic issues of extreme poverty. We are a country with huge challenges of poverty, extreme poverty, unemployment, health divides, class divides, wealth divides, the very rich, the very poor, and many challenges. I just don't have the time to cover all that, but I want to speak about the attacks that, by the way, in those attacks of 2008, third of those killed were South Africans themselves. So what happened was that with the violence that erupted and with the killing that was happening, no one asked, are you South African or not? And if you looked foreigner, the decision was that you must be from Zimbabwe or Zambia or somewhere in third of those killed, of the 60 odd killed, were South Africans. So you asked how different people look at the exhibition. So for example, the immigrant community, we work very closely with them. They find a great connection to the story of genocide, the story of Rwanda, the story of the Holocaust. The community from the Congo, from the DRC, works with us extremely closely. We did temporary exhibitions with them, film screening with them. Now during COVID-19, many of the refugee communities in South Africa did not receive food or grants from the government because they were asylum seekers or refugees. And we, as a Holocaust and Genocide Centre, could not, even though we were closed for many months, but we could not ignore the issues, and we became a collection point for food. And we started to collect also donations for refugee communities. So just as an example about a almost symbiotic connection between refugees from the DRC, from Nigeria, from Rwanda, of course, and Somalia, and so on, that are coming to the center and are very, very touched by the exhibitions and the events. But the exhibition touches many in different ways. White Afrikaners are touched because of other issues. The British that are coming are touched because of other issues. Also, in general, and maybe I'll finish with that, we display stories that about South Africa, that South Africans don't know. And I'll give one quick example. South Africans forgot, in a way, that South African troops were part of the Allied forces during the Second World War. South African troops fought in North Africa, they fought in East Africa, they fought in Italy, and actually it was 60th Squadron of the South African Air Force connected to the British Air Force that took the famous pictures of Auschwitz and Birkenau in 1944. It was South African pilots, navigators, and photographers that took the aerial photographs that were then analyzed by the CIA in the 1970s and showed people, Jews, walking to the gas chambers. I think many people know the photographs that I'm speaking about. South Africans don't know that. When they see that in our exhibition, they are absolutely amazed. So people are learning about their own history through visiting the center.
Okay, I'm opening up the space for someone who wants to raise a question. Is that the hand, Martin?
Yes. Okay. Hello, hi, I'm Nancy Lukens, Martin's spouse. I'm very, very excited to understand your approach in creating this exhibit, this museum, based on the principle of the curriculum that you described. It's very hopeful to me to see that. My background is teaching German studies, writing about the German resistance to Hitler, and also locally here in New Hampshire, close connection to the Black Heritage Trail, which has been existing for 30 years or so, and especially now in the context of Black Lives Matter and so on, has its own space with many projects, extremely exciting projects going on. And as I observe both the work going on in Germany today, creating exhibits with the assistance of high school students who have studied, for example, the stories of the people I've been working on, Adam von Trott, and that whole generation whose children now have grandchildren who are asking, you know, whoa, how do we even look at this? The way you describe using artifacts like the doll that had been returned, you know, just bringing home how many things happened at the same time that, thank goodness, there are, you know, concrete objects recovered to represent those stories. Mike, just quickly, I'm particularly thinking about the story, for example, of the children of many of the 20th of July resistors who were kidnapped by the SS while, you know, their fathers were being murdered, their mothers were in jail, were taken to a particular place in Hessen that was going to be one of the orphanages, and they were renamed. They were, you know, they lost their identity. Their clothes were taken away. And there has been an exhibit recently in Hessen about that story, about that particular so-called orphanage. But that orphanage is where those children, now grandparents, got to know each other very well, and they grew up together later. I mean, they came home, but the clothes that identified the daughters of Adam von Trott are what rescued them, because a friend recognized a Nazi child wearing the clothes of Adam von Trott's daughter. Okay, those clothes don't exist, but you know, it could be that artifacts like that are what say to the grandchildren, "Oh my goodness, this really happened. You know, it's real." Now in New Hampshire, it's the.
Could you ask you to come to a question, please?
Exactly. The question is, where are your sources among young people who tell you? I mean, do you have a connection? Do you invite school classes to come and help you form the next exhibit? What you were very specific about, you know, the shorter texts, the artifacts, the art, the music, and so on. Is there a development in how that will be in the future, based on you know, how many grandchildren's and grandparents and great-grandparents' stories are coming out in research? Do you understand? I'm really curious for our own purposes here in New Hampshire, where the youth leadership looks to be going in your project.
Yeah. Thank you. Really interesting. You know, the stories that you shared, and in the temporary exhibitions, I mean, the permanent exhibition hopefully can survive for about 10 years or more, and we don't have to redo it because it was so much work. But of course, we have a huge space upstairs for temporary exhibitions. And I'll tell you about one exhibition that we developed with the children, actually 3 generations. So children, grandchildren, and the parents of Congolese refugees from the times of colonial time, Belgian colonialism, through independence, wars, and so on, using a very interesting, methodology called digital storytelling. Mm-hmm. This digital storytelling, we were capturing in video, in sound, in drawings, in pictures, their stories. And then they created the exhibition, and we displayed the exhibition, and it was so popular by South Africans that we had to, it was supposed to be on display only for 2 weeks, and we had to extend it for, I think, about 2 months because so many came. It was called My Congo, My Story. So it was really, really wonderful. So that is just one example. Another example, and it also connects very quickly, Bjorn, to your question about artifacts and the difficult artifacts and the amazing artifacts. And we have amazing artifacts that came through to us. And one of the survivors, the Rwandan survivors, Xavier, he lost his entire family, many siblings, 14 siblings, parents in the genocide. He did not know where they are buried. And he told the story. He used to go to schools and tell his testimony, and we used to do workshops with the schools. And in one of those visits, the school decided to actually do a collection. They did baking and selling bakes and all sorts of donations that they were collecting. And they managed to get him a ticket to go back to Rwanda, to the Gacaca trials, and to find out from the perpetrators where his father and mother are buried. He found them through this school. The school actually allowed him to go back and find the bones, the remains of his father and his mother. And with his mother, Beatrice, was a key. She was still holding the key to her house. and she was wearing the rosary. She was very devout Catholic. And he took the rosary and he took the key, he buried them, came back to South Africa, and he donated the rosary and the key to us. And this is an act of, this is activism. It's activism by the kids to allow Xavier to close the circle and then tell this story in our center. And it's very encouraging for other youth to find out more about their histories and other histories and bring artifacts. So certainly we're doing that and more with artifacts and with other things.
Tali, you really addressed the last 2 minutes when you were talking what is really important to me and to many other people, that when we talk about representing past evils and trauma, which is the title we gave to our series, it is more than an exhibit. An exhibit is one catalyst, but you have to do more, from art to activism to engaging survivors across the generations. That part of activism and also care, like from the food drive that you did, is, to me anyway, an essential part of a museum that understands itself also as a moral institution, as a moral educational institution, and that we cannot neglect this aspect. So it's more than just thinking about what to exhibit and how to exhibit it, but what is the next step. And from my short visit at your place, I know you have a fantastic team of educators who do this, who go out all the time, who bring in classes, who go out to communities who wouldn't be able to come to Johannesburg, do teacher training, I mean, all of these things. And that, which of course, that's something you don't see on slides, and you cannot even get it across on slides, that kind of work. I think we have time for one last short question. I know on the chat there was a very simple question: is there a catalog for the museum that one can obtain? That's a very simple, straightforward question.
So first of all, you're invited to visit our website. We have lots of resources, and it is easy. So I'll just put it in the chat. So that's very, very easy. And oh, sorry, it's Johannesburg Holocaust. Sorry, one word. So you can look at the displays, you can look at many films and podcasts, meet our survivors, see our team. We have amazing team. So they put little short 3-minute videos on the website. And there is also a beautiful video, Bjorn, of you talking about this temporary exhibition about Bejan that I will encourage people to watch. It's only about 7-8 minutes. And what we need now, and that is something that we're working on for next year, is to get the funding to do a catalog that will be a printed catalog and a digital catalog as well. So this is happening hopefully in 2021. But what we did manage to get is funding to publish, and that will be in the next 3-4 months, a comprehensive portraits of all the survivors that came to South Africa, Rwanda and Holocaust. And that will be short stories, very modern approach, and that will be survivor story, will be available on our website in the next, I would say, 3 months, probably launched in January of 2021.
Tali, that brings us to our 75 minutes. We do usually honor the time we have asked you to be with us, but also the time of those who attended the meeting. And I think this would be a good moment to end, both on the more sober note on how to think about past traumas and evils, to represent them and stay active in the care that people need today, and the attention that conflict zones need today, as well as a very practical thing about the catalog. And hopefully people will go to your website, will perhaps get the catalog, and stay in touch in this particular way. If you ever go to South Africa, don't forget to stop by at the Johannesburg Museum. I should say Center, Holocaust and Genocide Center. As you heard, it's for free. If you go there, send Tali an email, say you listened to the talk today, and if she is around, I'm sure she will spend a few minutes with you, because that is the person who she is. Tali, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you everyone for attending today's talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And please come to South Africa when we can travel. I promise you a beautiful Rwandan cappuccino in our cafe. So
it's good South African coffee. I can attest to this.
Thank you, Bjorn, for your beautiful interview style. And thank you all for joining.